let's have a look at the Caledonians, one of the new Celtic factions. The Caledonians have, shame on you, the Germanic noble copy units of the Celtic warlord and the Celtic nobles. So the Celtic warlord is the copycat of the Nordic warlord, and the Celtic nobles the copycat of the Germanic nobles, but since this is a DLC, they are of course better. Then we have noble archers, royal archers, 150 range, 35 missile damage, a host of abilities on these units. All of the Celtic factions have guerrilla deployment, the Caledonians included, which can make for some hilarious effects. Now, bringing an archer general is risky. Now, these archers do have a lot of health, they do have a bit of armor, but I personally wouldn't ever advise bringing an archer general. Maybe if he was a 200 range one, but I'm not entirely sure. Then we have some very cheap Celtic levy units with a 20 attack against cavalry. We have the Celtic Spares, a bit more expensive, but you do get slightly more armor, health, bigger missile block chance, and you also start to get the spear wall ability. Celtic Spares, slight upgrade once again, and the Caterham Brigade. Now, this is a quite special thing. The Caterham Brigade, it's listed as that they have 0 attack against infantry. They are, for some reason, there's some mix-up. They are listed as, some of these units are listed as melee, while they are really spears. So their attack against cavalry is 30, and the horse whisperers have a 30 attack against cavalry. And Celtic good attack against cavalry is 20, and excellent is 30. So the creative is oh, I'm so fucking tired of this. So yeah, horse whisperers, a lot of health, decent amount of armor, and they also scare horses, which is an interesting ability that they have. Now, Celtic Band, very cheap. These are freemen copycats, by the way. And they have the same abilities and the same weaknesses as the freemen. Very, very cheap, good for supporting cavalry fights and just being meat shields in general. Celtic Warband, a step up, nice bit of armor, very low melee defense. Celtic Woodrunners, they are a very cheap shield wall unit. A very nice melee defense, but a bit low on the armor side. Same with Scottish Teachers. Scottish Teachers are, in my opinion, they are the most interesting unit in the Caledonian roster. And the reason for that is that they are very close to what the Berserkers, the Norse Berserkers and the other Berserkers should have been. Because they have a very high charge bonus, they have a very good amount of melee damage. They have a bit of armor, they have decent health and decent morale, and they have the ability to go Berserk, of course. And this makes, they have a small unit size as well. And this is, in my opinion, what the Berserkers should be, not a huge, expensive unit that is entirely incapable of dealing a lot of damage on the charge due to having weapons unsuited for their role as shock infantry. So Scottish Teachers, of course they are a DLC unit, so they are expected to be better than their counterparts. Celtic Warriors, again, good armor, good offensive stats, but poor defensive stats. Then we have the Fionna, once again, good offensive stats, decent offensive stats, good defensive stats. All of these axe units will have a 5 bonus against infantry. Celtic Axeband has a nice bit of armor for their price. Celtic Berserkers are very, very cheap, and this is a big fuck you to the Nordic factions that the Celtic Berserkers are this cheap. Celtic Axe Warriors, a slightly better version of the Celtic Axeband, and then the Caledonian Axeman. A nice bit of armor, nice offensive capabilities. Still, these units would have needed 10 attack against infantry in order to be viable, in my opinion. I've tested these units up against similarly priced swords, and you know what happens. So for the Celtic Bows, these Celtic Bows are not, I mean, the Celtic Bows are very nice and very cheap, but I mean, I don't see any reason at all whatsoever to bring elite Highland Archers or Highland Archers. For the price of one elite Highland Archer, you almost get 6 Celtic Bows, and the increase in combat ability just isn't there. I mean, sure, you do get a nice bit of armor, but just no. No. They have very cheap Celtic crossbows, and these crossbows, although they lack precision and barrage, they can do a lot of damage very, very quickly, especially together with guerrilla deployment. Then we have the Celtic Brigands, with their javelins, doing a lot of damage to cavalry. Too expensive for my tastes. The only melee cavalry here is the Mormire Cavalry. They have good stats for the price, but they also only have a sword, so no bonus against cavalry. Very good against infantry though, and they actually beat Germanic horsemen now. Some of the time at least. Then we have Celtic Cavalry Raiders and Mounted Spear Raiders, Brown Shield Raiders. Now the special thing about these units is that they have a ridiculous amount of damage against enemy cavalry. So if they use their flaming shots against cavalry, 45 bonus. Absolutely insane. The problem is though that without Parthian, it's going to be fairly difficult to get. They have a low speed of only 70. They are heavy skirmish cavalry, so you could potentially do some nice ambushing things with them, but they're going to be very hard to use effectively. They're going to be very hard to. It's going to be very hard to get your money's worth out of these units, because they require so much micro focused on those units alone that the micro on the rest of your army is probably going to suffer for it. With precision shot, these units would be an absolute nightmare to face. Without precision shot though, not so much. I mean, without parting shots. If you look at their melee stats are actually fairly decent for being a hybrid unit. Then we have the dogs. There's not much to say about the dogs. These dogs are way too expensive to be worth bringing to the field. So overall, the Celts are centered around fairly cheap infantry, fairly cheap skirmishers, and being sort of lacking in the cavalry department, which makes them a bit. I mean, in my opinion, the Nordic factions or the Viking forefather factions have too much cavalry, and the cavalry is too good. They shouldn't really have access to any kind of good melee cavalry or any kind of good cavalry at all. So, I think this was a smart move by the Creative Assembly to make the Celts historically more represented by their use of skirmishing and by the use of their skirmish cavalry and such. However, I think since the Germanic factions get their medieval longbows, why not give the Celts, or especially the Picts, their medieval longbows? Cheap crossbows, sure, it's nice, but the Celtic factions they are very gimmicky in terms of being able to guerrilla deploy everywhere. And this is where, once again, I have to say that separate multiplayer and single player balance is warranted for this game, because while it's very nice to be able to deploy anywhere on the battlefield when you're playing a single player battle, when you have two armies against each other that are able to do it, you can have situations like the one I showed you, where you deploy very close to each other and you deploy or you deploy on top of each other. And some people have said that, well, that's never going to happen when two Celtic factions play against each other, blah blah blah. The battlefield isn't that big, and with a certain number of games, it's bound to happen. Both players are bound to be thinking, okay, well, I will deploy on this flank because my opponent is probably going to deploy here, and then they both deploy in the same spots. It's going to happen. It's 100% with 100% certainty that's going to happen, because it's a possibility. And if there's a possibility of it happening, it's only a matter of time before it happens. So, those are the Caledonians. If you like infantry, and you like bringing a lot of infantry, the Caledonians are a decent faction, and they do have some nice combinations of units that can be brought. The main problem for these factions is, for this faction in particular, is going to be contending with enemy skirmishers. Overall, very low missile block chances. very low range on the skirmishers, and then of course dealing with enemy cavalry is going to be very difficult. If you can use these mounted spear raiders and these round shield raiders, if you can handle the micro, you can kill a lot of enemy cavalry with them. But if you can't, then it's going to be very, very difficult for the Caledonians to work against factions that has good cavalry. Strength and honor.